The applause was loud enough to drown out a man's entire life. I stood at the back of the banquet hall, holding a champagne glass I hadn't touched, while my younger brother accepted the industry's highest Young Entrepreneur Award. The giant screen behind him displayed photographs from the past decade. His first investment, his first company, his first major acquisition, his rise, his success, his future. The audience rose to their feet. My father was smiling. My mother was crying. The cameras captured every second. No one noticed the man standing near the exit. No one noticed me. Then again, they hadn't noticed me for years. Without my family, Liang Wei said into the microphone, his voice thick with emotion, none of this would have been possible. The crowd applauded again. He looked directly toward my parents. My parents sacrificed everything for me. More applause. My mother's eyes turned red. My father looked prouder than I had ever seen him. Liang Wei continued, and my brother. The hall quieted slightly. For one absurd second, I wondered if he would finally tell the truth. If he would mention the loans, the sleepless nights, the investors I convinced, the opportunities one handed over, the mistakes I fixed, the disasters I buried. 10 years. 10 years of standing behind him. 10 years of cleaning up every mess. 10 years of sacrificing my own future so he could build his. Maybe for once, my brother taught me something important. His smile widened. What failure looks like. Laughter spread through the room. A few people looked uncomfortable. Most didn't. My chest tightened. Liang Wei shook his head dramatically. He showed me exactly what not to do. More laughter. I owe part of my success to having such a useful example. The audience laughed again, this time louder. I looked toward my parents. Neither of them reacted. Neither of them defended me. Neither of them seemed surprised. Because they had heard worse. Because they had said worse. Because this wasn't humiliation. This was tradition. The screen behind Liang Wei changed. A photo appeared. Me, 22 years old, standing outside the family company. The image had been taken after my first failed startup. A failure that happened because I had mortgaged everything to keep the family business alive during a cash crisis. A failure my parents never acknowledged. The crowd laughed again. Liang Wei smiled. I hope everyone learns an important lesson tonight. He pointed toward the photograph. Never become that guy. The room exploded. My hands trembled. Not from anger. Not anymore. The strange thing about pain was that eventually it stopped hurting. After enough years, disappointment became familiarity. Betrayal became routine. You stopped expecting fairness. You stopped expecting gratitude. You stopped expecting love. You simply endured. I set the untouched glass down. Nobody noticed when I left. Nobody ever did. Outside, rain poured across the city. The lights of Jiangnan glittered through the darkness. The skyline looked beautiful. I had helped build half of it. Nobody knew. Nobody cared. My phone vibrated. Mother. I stared at the screen. Then answered. Where are you? She asked immediately. I left. A pause. Your brother is meeting investors after the ceremony. I laughed softly. Of course. Not congratulations. Not concern. Work. Always work. What do you need? One of the investors wants to discuss the logistics project. Weyer isn't familiar with the details. I closed my eyes. The logistics project. My project. The one I'd spent 3 years building. The one transferred into Liang Wei's name. The one everyone believed belonged to him. I see. You'll come back, right? Rain soaked through my jacket. Cars passed along the street. The city kept moving. I won't. Silence. Then irritation. What do you mean you won't? I'm tired. Everyone is tired. No. I looked toward the illuminated hotel. For the first time, I think I'm done. Mother sighed heavily. The way someone sighs at an inconvenience. Your brother needs you. The word struck me harder than the humiliation inside. Your brother needs you. Not. How are you? Not. Are you okay? Not. Come home. Just duty. Just obligation. Just another chain. I hung up. For the first time in years. I hung up first. The rain intensified. I walked without direction. Past restaurants. Past office buildings. Past people living lives that belonged to them. I wonder what that felt like. At 34 years old, I had never truly lived for myself. Every decision had been for someone else. My parents. My brother. The family company. the family reputation, the family future. Never mind, especially not mine. My phone rang again. Father. I ignored it. Then again. Ignored. Again. Ignored. Messages began arriving. Where are you? Stop being immature. Investors are waiting. This isn't about you. The final message made me laugh. You owe this family. After everything we've done for you. I stood beneath a traffic light and stared at those words. After everything we've done for you. Memory after memory surfaced. Dropping out of graduate school to help the company. Selling my apartment. Giving Liang Wei my investor contacts. Taking responsibility for failed projects he caused. Working until dawn. Missing funerals. Missing relationships. Missing life. After everything we've done for you. The light turned green. I stepped forward. Headlights appeared. A horn screamed. The world exploded into white. Pain. Then silence. Then darkness. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't feel my body. Voices echoed somewhere far away. Sirens. Shouting. Panic. Then nothing. Strangely, my final emotion wasn't fear. It wasn't anger either. It was regret. Regret for a life spent waiting for people to appreciate sacrifices they never asked me to make. Regret for believing love could be earned. Regret for confusing usefulness with value. The darkness deepened. And then, a voice. Young. Familiar. Brother. My eyes opened. Sunlight flooded the room. I stared at a ceiling I hadn't seen in over a decade. My heartbeat stopped. No. Impossible. I sat upright. The movement was so sudden I nearly fell out of bed. A teenager stood near the doorway. 17 years old. Annoying haircut. Permanent arrogance. Liang Wei. Not 32. 17. Alive. Young. Confused. What's wrong with you? I looked around. The bedroom. The furniture. The desk. The old apartment. My apartment. The one I'd sold years ago. My hand shook. Younger. No scars. No calluses. No signs of age. I rushed toward the mirror. 21. I was 21 again. My breathing became uneven. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. Yet every detail felt solid. The smell of breakfast from a kitchen. The sound of traffic outside. The morning sunlight. Reality. Liang Wei frowned. Did you hit your head? I looked at him. Really looked. The face that would someday stand on a stage and laugh at my failures. The face I had spent half my life protecting. He rolled his eyes. If you're done being weird, Mom says hurry up. Then he left. Just like that. As if nothing had happened. As if my entire life hadn't just shattered. I stood frozen. Then I saw the calendar. September 12th. Year 2013. My stomach tightened. I knew this date. I remember it perfectly. Today was the day everything started. The day my parents would ask me to postpone graduate school. The day they would tell me the family company needed help. The day I would sacrifice my future. The day I would begin disappearing. I stared at the calendar. A second chance. A real one. Not a dream. Not a hallucination. A second chance. The door opened again. Mother. Younger. Healthier. The wrinkles around her eyes hadn't appeared yet. For a moment, emotion hit me unexpectedly. Despite everything. Despite the pain. Seeing her young again hurt. She smiled. The same smile that once made me believe I mattered. Breakfast is ready. I nodded quietly. She noticed my expression. What happened? Nothing. And everything. I followed her into the dining room. Father sat at the table reading financial reports. Liang Wei was eating. Exactly as I remembered. Exactly. The sight sent chills through me. Because I knew what happened next. Every word. Every sentence. Every manipulation. I had already lived this day. Father put down the papers. We need to discuss something. There it was. The beginning. I sat. Mother exchanged a glance with Father. A rehearsed look. One I hadn't recognized the first time. Now I did. Father cleared his throat. The company is facing some difficulties. Of course it was. I remembered every number. Every debt. Every crisis. I remembered solving all of them. He continued. We need someone we can trust. I remained silent. Mother smiled gently. Graduate school can wait a year. A year. The famous year. The year that became 10. I looked at them. Really looked. Not as parents. Not as people whose approval I desperately needed. Just people. Flawed people. Selfish people. People making choices. The difference felt enormous. Father leaned forward. This family needs you. The words echoed strangely. This family needs you. In my previous life, those words had controlled me. Today, they sounded different. Today, they sounded like a request. Not a command. Not destiny. A request. And requests could be refused. The realization nearly made me laugh. Mother reached across the table. You understand, don't you? I remember the answer I gave last time. Of course. I'll help. Family comes first. I remembered the pride on their faces. I remembered feeling useful, needed, loved. Now I knew better. I looked down at my untouched breakfast, then back up. No. Silence. The room froze. Liang Wei nearly dropped his chopsticks. Father blinked. Mother stared. What? No. I repeated it calmly. I won't postpone graduate school. The silence became absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because one word had changed history. Father's face darkened. What are you talking about? I said no. His voice sharpened. The company could collapse. In my previous life, that sentence terrified me. Now I knew the truth. The company wouldn't collapse. Not immediately. Not even close. There were solutions. Solutions I would eventually provide. Solutions they were too proud to find themselves. I stood. You'll figure something out. Mother looked shocked. Liang Chun. I have class. Father slammed his hand against the table. You selfish. The word stopped him. Perhaps because he'd never used it against me before. Perhaps because even he realized how absurd it sounded. Selfish. After everything. I smiled slightly. Not bitterly. Not angrily. Just tired. Then I walked out. For the first time, I walked away. Outside, the city felt different. Not because it had changed. Because I had. The future unfolded inside my mind. Events. Markets. Investments. Companies. Technologies. Opportunities. Things people wouldn't understand for years. Things I remembered. Knowledge worth fortunes. Knowledge worth freedom. I stopped at a pedestrian crossing and looked toward the skyline. In my previous life, I spent 10 years building someone else's future. This time I would build my own. Not through revenge. Not through anger. Not to prove anything. Simply because I could. My phone rang. Mother. Again. I watched the screen. Then silenced it. A message arrived moments later. Come home. We need to talk. Another. Your father is upset. Another. Family should help family. I looked at the words. Then put the phone away. For years, those messages control me. Not anymore. The people who expect endless sacrifice are often the ones who value it least. I looked toward the future I had never allowed myself to pursue. And for the first time in either life, I made a choice that belonged entirely to me. This time, I wouldn't do it again. The first time I lived through this year, I spent 3 months trying to save the family company. The second time, I spent the first week ignoring phone calls. The difference felt absurdly small. It changed everything. My phone vibrated across the library desk. Mother. Again. I glanced at the screen before turning it face down. Across from me, several graduate students were discussing an economics paper. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows, afternoon sunlight stretched across the university campus. Life moved forward. A simple thing, an ordinary thing, and somehow it felt revolutionary. In my previous life, I never made it this far. The week after that conversation at breakfast, I had withdrawn my enrollment plans and entered the family company full-time. One compromise, one sacrifice, one delay. The first brick in a prison I spent more than a decade building. This time I remained exactly where I belonged. In class, studying, living. My phone vibrated again. Then again. Then again. I finally picked it up. 32 missed calls. 14 messages. 2 voicemails. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Not because I was tempted. Because I was amazed. When someone loses control over a person they depend on, they often call it concern. A shadow fell across my desk. Everything okay? I looked up. Professor Zhao. Early 40s. Sharp eyes. Brilliant economist. One of the few people who had genuinely believed in me during my first life. Back then, I abandoned his research program. I remembered the disappointment on his face. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind reserved for wasted potential. Everything's fine. I said. He studied me. Your expression says otherwise. I smiled faintly. Family issues. Understanding crossed his face. One universal language. Family issues. Professor Zhao nodded. Sometimes people confuse obligation with destiny. The words landed harder than he probably intended. He adjusted his glasses. Just because someone expects something from you doesn't mean you owe it. Then he walked away, leaving me staring at the empty space where he had stood. The timing was almost funny. In my previous life, I wouldn't have understood that sentence. Now it felt like confirmation. The universe didn't owe me a second chance. But perhaps it was giving me opportunities to understand the first one. My phone rang again. This time it was Father. I answered. Silence greeted me first. Then his voice. Come to the office. Not hello. Not how are you. Straight to business. Something's never changed. I'm busy. You need to be here. Need. There was that word again. I don't. His breathing grew heavier. The company is in trouble. I looked out the window. Students crossed the campus carrying books and coffee. Nobody knew they were witnessing one of the most important moments of my life. Because the most important moments rarely look dramatic. Sometimes they look like saying no. Again, I hope things improve. The silence on the other end became dangerous. Liang Chun. Yes. Your family needs you. I closed my eyes. The sentence had ruled me once. Now it sounded smaller, weaker, almost desperate. Good luck, Dad. I hung up. That evening, they came to my apartment. Not one of them. All of them. Father, Mother, Liang Wei, the entire delegation. I opened the door and immediately understood something important. They were afraid. Not openly, not consciously, but afraid. Because the family system had shifted, and systems resist change. Mother entered first. Her expression carried a mixture of concern and frustration. Father followed, rigid, controlled, angry. Liang Wei looked confused. At 17, he still hadn't learned how much of his confidence depended on me standing behind him. Nobody sat down. The atmosphere didn't allow it. Father spoke first. What exactly are you doing? I'm living here. You know what I mean? Of course I did. I leaned against the kitchen counter. So explain it. His jaw tightened. The company needs help. You've mentioned that. Mother stepped forward. Chun, nobody is asking you to give up your future. I almost laughed. The lie was so familiar. So practiced. Nobody is asking you to give up your future. Only postpone it. Only delay it. Only sacrifice a little. Then a little more. Then everything. I remembered how that promise ended. 10 years. No future. No degree. No ownership. No recognition. Nothing. I disagree. Mother blinked. What? I think that's exactly what you're asking. The room became still. Not because the accusation was unfair. Because it was accurate. Father crossed his arms. You're being dramatic. A strange calm settled over me. In my previous life, that word would have started an argument. Now it didn't. I didn't need them to understand. I only needed to stop participating. You came here for an answer. I looked at each of them. The answer is still no. Liang Wei suddenly spoke. His voice carried genuine confusion. What? I turned toward him. The future award winner. The future CEO. The future man who would stand on a stage and mock me. At 17, he still looked harmless. Maybe that was why it took me so long to understand him. Not every selfish person looks cruel. Some simply assume everyone exists to support them. Why what? Why won't you help? Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. Because I already did. Because I already gave you 10 years. Because I already know how this story ends. Instead I said, because it's your company too. The words hit harder than expected. Liang Wei frowned. What does that mean? It means you're old enough to help solve problems. Father immediately intervened. He's still young. There it was. The pattern. Automatic. Instinctive. Protect him. Shield him. Excuse him. Transfer responsibility elsewhere. Usually onto me. I nodded slowly. Then he'll never learn. Nobody responded. Because nobody wanted to. Eventually they left. Angry. Frustrated. Confused. The door closed behind them. And for the first time in my life, I felt something unexpected. Not guilt. Relief. The company crisis intensified. I knew it would. I remembered every detail. Every mistake. Every bad decision. Every warning ignored. During my first life, I fixed them before they became disasters. This time nobody did. The consequences arrived quickly. Not because fate changed, because intervention disappeared. 1 week later, Mother called again. I answered while walking through campus. Chun. Her voice sounded tired. Genuinely tired. For a moment, old instincts surfaced. Help her. Fix it. Step in. The reflex was powerful. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. What happened? The bank rejected the extension. I already knew. The suppliers are threatening legal action. I knew that too. They won't listen to your father. Of course they wouldn't. I had been the one maintaining those relationships. The realization struck me unexpectedly. For years I believed I was replaceable. The company clearly disagreed. Mother hesitated, then finally said it. Can you talk to them? The old role. Offered once more. Not as a son, as a solution. I stopped walking. Students flowed around me. Conversations. Laughter. Life. Meanwhile, my mother waited for rescue. Part of me hurt. Because I wasn't heartless. Because despite everything, I still loved them. Maybe that was the hardest part. People imagine boundaries are easy when someone hurts you. They're not. Especially when you love them. I won't. Her silence stretched. Why? The question sounded sincere. Almost childlike. Why won't you save us? I looked toward the sky. Because nobody saved me. Because every rescue taught you I would always be available. Because if I solve this again, nothing changes. Because you won't stop until there's nothing left of me. But I only said, you need to solve your own problems. Then I ended the call. My hands trembled afterward. Not from regret. From grief. Some relationships don't break all at once. They crack slowly, piece by piece. And every crack hurts. 2 days later, I received an email. Not from family. From Professor Zhao. A research opportunity. Competitive. Prestigious. Life-changing. I remembered it. The first time I declined. The company needed me. This time I accepted immediately. Then I sat staring at the confirmation screen. A strange emotion filled my chest. Excitement. I had almost forgotten what that felt like. The future opened slightly. Just enough to glimpse. And I wanted more. The confrontation happened that night. Not at home. Not at the company. At my grandfather's house. A place that carried authority inside the family. When the call came, I already knew something significant had happened. The family only gathered there during crises. I arrived just after sunset. The atmosphere felt wrong immediately. Too quiet. Too tense. Inside the living room sat nearly everyone. Father, mother, Liang Wei, several relatives. And, at the head of the room, grandfather, 80 years old, sharp-minded, observant, one of the few people who sometimes saw more than he admitted. Nobody smiled when I entered. That wasn't surprising. What surprised me was the expression on Liang Wei's face. Fear. Real fear. I took a seat. Grandfather folded his hands. Something happened today. I remained silent. Father looked exhausted. Mother looked devastated. Then grandfather continued. The company accounts were reviewed. Interesting. Very interesting. I knew where this was going. But not this early. Not yet. Not according to the original timeline. Which meant something had changed. A lot. Grandfather's eyes moved toward Liang Wei. Would you like to explain? Liang Wei went pale. My pulse slowed. Because suddenly I realized what was happening. Without me managing problems behind the scenes. Without me quietly correcting mistakes. Certain truths had surfaced much sooner. Liang Wei swallowed hard. Nobody helped him. Nobody interrupted. For once, there was nowhere to hide. Grandfather's voice became colder. Tell them. Silence. Then, I used company funds. The room froze. Mother's face lost all color. Father stared. What? Liang Wei looked down. It was temporary. My heartbeat slowed further. I remembered this. Not the timing. The event. The first life version. I had discovered the missing money. I secretly replaced it. I protected him. Nobody ever learned the truth. Nobody ever held him accountable. Nobody ever forced him to grow up. Now the truth stood alone. And for the first time, nobody was standing between Liang Wei and the consequences of his own choices. Grandfather slowly turned toward me. Our eyes met. Something unreadable flashed through his gaze. Not accusation, not blame, recognition, as if he had finally noticed the missing pillar holding up the entire structure. The room remained silent, heavy, dangerous, and I realized this was only the beginning. The future was already changing, far faster than I expected, and nobody, not even me, knew exactly where those changes would lead. Every act of rescue teaches someone they never need to save themselves. Tonight, nobody was rescuing Liang Wei, and for the first time in his life, he looked terrified. The silence in my grandfather's living room lasted so long that the ticking clock became unbearable. Nobody looked away from Liang Wei. Nobody rushed to defend him. Nobody explained things on his behalf. For the first time in his life, he stood alone. I watched his hands. They were trembling. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me, because I knew him. Or rather, I knew the man he would become. Confidence had always followed protection. Remove the protection, and the confidence became something else. Fear. Grandfather remained motionless. The old man's gaze carried none of the anger father often displayed. That made it worse. Anger can be resisted. Disappointment cannot. How much? Grandfather finally asked. Liang Wei swallowed. 400,000. Mother gasped. Father's face changed. Not immediately. The transformation happened gradually. Disbelief, confusion, calculation, then understanding. 400,000 yuan. Not a mistake. Not an accident. Not something that disappeared because of poor bookkeeping. A choice. A deliberate one. Where is it? Father asked. His voice sounded strangely calm. That frightened me more than shouting would have. Liang Wei lowered his head. I invested it. The room froze again. Father stood. His chair scraped sharply against the floor. You what? I thought. You thought. The words exploded from him. You thought. Mother looked like she might cry. Several relatives exchanged shocked glances. Nobody had expected this. Not because Liang Wei was incapable of poor decisions. Because nobody believed he would ever face consequences for them, including Liang Wei himself. The realization seemed to be arriving in real time. A person who spends years protected from consequences often mistakes protection for ability. Now reality was correcting the misunderstanding. Grandfather raised one hand. The room quieted. What investment? Liang Wei hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. The investment was gone. The money was gone. And he knew it. Finally he spoke. A friend's project. Father laughed. The sound carried no humor whatsoever. A friend's project. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended him. I sat quietly, observing. The first life flashed through my mind. Back then, I discovered the missing funds before anyone else. I covered them, created accounting adjustments, negotiated payments, protected the company, protected Liang Wei, protected the family. Nobody knew. Nobody thanked me. Nobody even realized what had happened. Now I watched the scene unfold naturally, without intervention. The difference was astonishing. Grandfather looked toward father. Recover the money. Father nodded. Then grandfather looked at Liang Wei. And you, the old man's voice hardened. You will explain every detail. For the first time, I saw genuine panic in my younger brother's eyes. Not because of the money, because he couldn't escape. Not this time. After the meeting ended, relatives left in uneasy silence. The family remained behind. I intended to leave as well. Mother stopped me. Chun. I paused. She looked exhausted. Far more exhausted than a woman her age should have looked. Stress. Fear. Disappointment. The company. The missing money. The pressure. Everything was catching up. For a brief moment, sympathy surfaced. Not enough to change my decisions. Enough to hurt. Can we talk? I nodded. We moved into the garden behind the house. The night air felt cool. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the stone wall. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Mother finally broke the silence. Did you know? The question surprised me. Not because she asked it, because she asked it carefully, almost cautiously. I looked at her. Know what? About your brother. There it was. The real question. I understood immediately. Not suspicion. Not accusation. Recognition. A growing realization that I used to know everything happening inside the company. that problems somehow disappeared around me, that disasters often ended before reaching anyone else. She was beginning to see the outline of things she'd never noticed. I considered my answer, then chose honesty. I knew he liked taking risks. Mother closed her eyes. Pain crossed her face. Not because of the statement, because of what it implied. Why didn't you say anything? A fair question, one that struck deeper than she intended. Why didn't you save us? Again, always the same question. I looked toward the dark garden, because I already spent one lifetime doing exactly that. Instead, I said, nobody asked. The answer seemed to confuse her, because technically it was true. Nobody asked. Nobody listened either. People rarely seek warnings when they're convinced everything is fine. Mother rubbed her forehead. Things weren't supposed to happen like this. The sentence lingered. I almost smiled. No, they weren't. In my first life, I prevented most of this. Nobody ever realized how much. Mother stared at me. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of saying something important. Then she stopped herself, perhaps because admitting certain truths requires admitting others. Eventually, she sighed. You've changed. The statement hung between us. I nodded. Yes. This time she didn't argue, didn't deny it, didn't tell me I was imagining things. She simply looked sad, and somehow that felt worse. The next morning brought another surprise. An email, then a phone call, then another. The future was moving faster than expected. I sat in a quiet campus cafe while reviewing market reports. The door opened. Professor Zhao entered. He carried 2 coffees. One landed in front of me. Good news. I raised an eyebrow. What makes you think there's good news? You've been smiling at spreadsheets. A fair point. I laughed softly. Professor Zhao sat down. What happened? I considered explaining, then decided against discussing family matters. Instead, I pointed toward the reports. Several industries are about to change. His eyes narrowed. Professor Zhao enjoyed predictions, especially accurate ones. And how do you know? I nearly laughed again, because I'd already lived through them. Instead, I tapped several sections. Technology, logistics, digital infrastructure, areas that would explode over the next decade, areas most investors still underestimated. Professor Zhao listened quietly. When I finished, he leaned back. You sound unusually confident. I looked at the city beyond the cafe window. Confidence? No. Memory. A very different thing. The opportunity is obvious. It isn't. He smiled. That's why opportunity exists. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, Professor Zhao made an unexpected suggestion. You should meet someone. I looked up. A researcher? No. A businessman? No. The smile widened. Someone much more useful. 3 days later, I found myself standing inside one of the largest venture investment firms in Jiangnan. In my first life, I wouldn't enter this building for another 7 years. Today, I walked through the front doors before my 22nd birthday. Life was strange. The receptionist led me toward a conference room. Inside sat a woman in her 40s. Simple suit, calm expression, sharp eyes, very sharp eyes. She stood and extended her hand. Sulan. I knew the name immediately. Almost everyone in business circles would eventually know it. One of the most respected investors in the country. In the future, she would back multiple billion-yuan companies. In my first life, we met once. Briefly, professionally. Nothing came of it. This time felt different. We sat. The conversation began. 10 minutes later, she stopped asking polite questions. 20 minutes later, she stopped testing me. 30 minutes later, she became interested. I recognized the transition because I remembered it from countless negotiations in my previous life. People have a moment. A specific moment. The instant they realize you're more capable than expected. Sulan reached that moment. You've thought about this extensively. I smiled. You could say that. The understatement nearly made me laugh. She studied me. Most people your age talk about ideas. Her fingers tapped the table. You talk about outcomes. My heartbeat remained steady, because outcomes were easier when you'd already seen them happen. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. When it finally ended, Sulan handed me a business card. Let's stay in contact. A simple sentence. An ordinary sentence. Except it wasn't. People like Sulan didn't say those words casually. Outside the building, sunlight reflected from the glass towers. I slipped the card into my wallet. The future had just shifted again, and this shift belonged entirely to me. Not my family, not the company, me. That evening, another truth surfaced. This one much uglier. I learned about it by accident. Or perhaps fate simply decided enough secrets had remained buried. I was leaving campus when my phone vibrated. The number belonged to someone I hadn't expected. Zhang Chong, former accounting manager at the family company. In my first life, he resigned after a dispute. I remembered him as honest, careful, the kind of employee businesses desperately need and frequently ignore. I answered, "Hello, Chun." His voice sounded tense. "Can we meet?" Immediately. No small talk. No explanation. Something was wrong. An hour later we sat in a quiet tea house. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Zhang Chong looked older than I remembered. More tired. More wary. He didn't waste time. "I'm resigning." I nodded. "I heard there were problems." "There are." His expression darkened. Then he placed a folder on the table. My pulse slowed, because I recognized that folder. Not physically, conceptually. Evidence. The kind people collect when they no longer trust their employers. "What is it?" He slid it toward me. "Records." I opened the folder. The first page immediately tightened my chest. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed something. The family company's problems had never been caused solely by incompetence. There was something worse. Fraud. Small at first, then larger, then systematic. Several managers had been manipulating contracts, inflating expenses, creating false invoices, skimming funds. The numbers weren't catastrophic. Not yet, but they would become catastrophic. I remembered the first life. The company nearly collapsed years later. Nobody understood why. I spent months trying to save it. Now I knew. The rot had started much earlier. I looked up. "Who knows about this?" Zhang Chong laughed bitterly. "Nobody wants to know." That answer told me everything. He leaned forward. "Your father ignores warnings." Not surprising. "Your brother doesn't understand the reports." Also not surprising. "And everyone assumes you'll fix it." The words settled heavily between us. Everyone assumes you'll fix it. For years, that assumption shaped my life. I closed the folder. "I'm not involved anymore." "I know." His gaze remained steady. "That's why I'm telling you." I frowned. "Why?" The answer came immediately. Because he trusted me. Not the family. Me. A strange emotion surfaced. Respect. Something I rarely received from people closest to me. Zhang Chong stood. "Be careful." Then he left, leaving the folder behind, leaving the truth behind, and leaving me staring at evidence that could eventually destroy everything. Outside, rain continued falling. Inside, I sat alone, thinking, observing, choosing. In my first life, I would have rushed to warn everyone, rushed to fix everything, rushed to save the company. This time I remained seated, not because I didn't care, because some truths only matter when people are willing to hear them. And right now, nobody was listening. I looked through the rain-streaked window. The city lights blurred into gold and white. The future was changing. Secrets were surfacing. Consequences were beginning. And somewhere ahead, something much larger was waiting. For the first time, I understood the meaning of restraint. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. My phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. Only one sentence. "Your father isn't being told the whole truth." I stared at the screen, then at the folder, then back at the message. A cold feeling moved through my chest, because suddenly I realized something. The corruption inside the company might be far deeper than anyone suspected, including me, and whoever sent that message knew it. I read the message 5 times. The words never changed. "Your father isn't being told the whole truth." No signature, no explanation, no demand, just a statement, a warning, the kind that arrives when someone wants to expose something but isn't ready to step into the light themselves. Rain continued sliding down the tea house window. I stare at my reflection. In my first life, this message never came. Or perhaps it did, and I never saw it. Back then, I was too busy extinguishing fires to investigate where the smoke came from. Now I wasn't running, which meant I could finally see. My phone vibrated again. Another message. "Check the logistics subsidiary." Then silence. Nothing else. No name. No response. I sat motionless. The logistics subsidiary. My chest tightened, because I knew that department very well. In my first life, I eventually spent years rebuilding it. Years. At the time, I assumed the problems came from poor management. Bad luck. Market conditions. Now I wasn't so sure. I closed the folder. Something deeper was happening. And for the first time, I intended to understand it. The next morning, I met Sulan again. Not because I planned to discuss family matters. Because life refused to pause while old problems unfolded. The meeting took place inside a quiet conference room overlooking the river. The city stretched beyond the glass. Construction cranes. Office towers. Traffic. Opportunity. Everything I never allowed myself to pursue before. Sulan studied a proposal while I explained a logistics technology platform that would become highly valuable within the next decade. Halfway through my explanation, she stopped me. You're distracted? I blinked. Am I? Yes. She closed the folder. Family. The question surprised me. She smiled slightly. People only have 3 expressions when distracted. I raise an eyebrow. And those are money, a finger, love, another finger, family, the third. You don't look worried about money. I laughed despite myself. No, and you definitely don't look like someone thinking about romance. Good observation. Her smile widened. So family. I nodded. For several moments, she remained silent. Then she asked, do they deserve your loyalty? The question landed harder than expected. Not because I didn't know the answer, because nobody had ever asked it. People constantly asked whether I loved my family, whether I would help them, whether I would sacrifice for them. Nobody asked whether that loyalty had been earned. I looked out toward the river. I don't know anymore. Sulan nodded, then said something I would remember for years. Sometimes people become addicted to being needed. I turned toward her. She continued. They confuse usefulness with love. The room became very quiet, because she had unknowingly described my entire first life. Useful, reliable, available, necessary, never valued, never protected, never chosen, only needed. Sulan gathered her documents. The world doesn't reward sacrifice as much as people think. Then she stood. It rewards results. After she left, I remained seated, thinking, because every meaningful change in life begins with recognizing a lie. And perhaps the biggest lie I'd ever believed was that being needed meant being loved. That afternoon, I visited the logistics subsidiary. Not openly, not as management, not as family, just another visitor. The building looked exactly as I remembered. For stories. Old exterior, overworked staff, the smell of stale coffee and stress. I walked through the lobby slowly, observing, listening. Years of experience had taught me something valuable. Most secrets aren't hidden. They're ignored. Near the elevators, 2 employees were arguing quietly. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I simply recognized one of the names mentioned. Director Huang. Interesting. Very interesting. The conversation ended when they noticed me. Both immediately fell silent. Too quickly. A bad sign. I continued walking. My instincts sharpened. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. 3 days later, the first crack appeared. Publicly. Violently. The company lost a major contract. Not a small one. A crucial one. The type that keeps businesses alive during difficult periods. News spread fast. Employees panicked. Managers blamed each other. Investors became nervous. And for the first time, Father looked genuinely overwhelmed. I learned about it during a family meeting. Grandfather had called everyone together again. The atmosphere felt heavier than before. Nobody spoke much. Nobody smiled. The contract loss had shaken everyone. Father looked exhausted. Mother looked worried. Liangwei looked scared. Not angry. Not defensive. Scared. Reality was finally reaching him. Grandfather spoke first. What happened? Nobody answered immediately. Then Father sighed. The client withdrew. Grandfather waited. Father continued. They claimed our reports contained inconsistencies. My heartbeat slowed. There it was. The word. Inconsistencies. A polite business term. Often used when people don't want to accuse someone of fraud directly. I looked toward Liangwei. His eyes remained fixed on the floor. Interesting. Very interesting. Grandfather noticed. So, the old man leaned forward. Who made the reports? Silence. Then, the logistics division. The room froze, because everyone suddenly realized the same thing. The logistics division again. The department mentioned in the anonymous message. The department linked to suspicious accounting. The department losing contracts. The pieces were starting to align. Grandfather's expression hardened. Investigate everything. No one argued. No one dared. The investigation began quietly. Then it exploded. Not because of me, because people started talking. One employee became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 12. Documents appeared. Emails surfaced. Payment records emerged. The deeper auditors looked, the worse things became. By the end of the week, the situation was impossible to hide. Several managers had spent years manipulating contracts, inflating costs, diverting payments, creating shell suppliers. The scale shocked everyone, including me. In my first life, I never discovered the full truth. I spent years repairing damage without understanding its source. Now the source stood exposed, and it was ugly, very ugly. The confrontation happened in the main conference room. Every major shareholder attended. Every senior manager, every auditor, every person whose future depended on the company surviving. I wasn't invited, yet somehow I ended up there. Grandfather insisted. When I entered, dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some surprised, some curious, some resentful. I ignored them. At the far end of the table sat Director Huang, the man whose name I'd overheard near the elevators. His confidence looked damaged, not destroyed, damaged. A dangerous stage. People cornered by truth often become unpredictable. The lead auditor stood. His voice echoed through the room. We completed the review. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The auditor opened a file, then began reading. Transaction after transaction. Contract after contract. Evidence after evidence. Each revelation struck harder than the last. The room grew colder. 10 minutes later, nobody doubted the outcome. 20 minutes later, nobody doubted the guilt. 30 minutes later, the company everyone thought was suffering from bad luck had a different diagnosis. Corruption. Systematic. Deliberate. Profitable. Director Huang finally stood. This is unfair. His voice shook slightly. The market conditions. No. The auditor cut him off. The evidence is clear. Huang turned toward Father. Desperate now. You know how difficult those years were. Father stared at him. No response. Huang's panic deepened. He looked around the room, searching, looking for support, finding none. Then his gaze landed on me. For several seconds, he simply stared. Recognition appeared, then anger, then something worse. Fear, because suddenly he understood something. I wasn't saving anyone. Not this time. His voice rose. Why are you here? The question surprised everyone, including Father. I remained calm. Grandfather invited me. No. Huang pointed directly at me. You knew. The room turned silent. Every eye shifted toward me. I held his gaze. What exactly did I know? His mouth opened, then closed, because the truth trapped him. If he explained how much I knew, he would need to explain how much he had hidden. Grandfather's voice cut through the tension. Answer the question. Huang said nothing, because he couldn't. The silence condemned him more effectively than any accusation. The auditor continued reading. The evidence continued piling up, and eventually the meeting reached a point where denial became impossible. The company filed legal complaints. Authorities became involved. Several managers resigned immediately. Others attempted to flee responsibility. None succeeded. The collapse had begun, and it could no longer be stopped. That night, Father visited my apartment alone. For the first time in years. No mother, no Yongwei, no pressure campaign. Just him. He looked older than I remembered, older than he should. We sat across from each other in silence. Neither of us knew where to begin. Eventually he spoke. I was wrong. The words stunned me. Not because they were dramatic, because they were rare. Very rare. Father wasn't a man who apologized easily. I remained quiet. He stared into his tea. I should have listened. A long pause followed. Then another. The room felt strangely fragile. Like something important was happening and neither of us knew how to handle it. Finally, he looked at me. You saw things I didn't. I considered that, then shook my head. No. He frowned. No. You didn't want to see them. The distinction mattered. A lot. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then something changed in his expression. Not anger. Understanding. Painful understanding. The kind people reach when excuses stop working. He nodded slowly. And for the first time in my life, I think he truly heard me. As the investigation widened, more evidence surfaced. More names emerged. More secrets collapsed. Every new discovery pointed toward the same conclusion. The damage had existed for years. The corruption had existed for years. The warning signs had existed for years. Truth did not create damage. It revealed where damage already existed. And now there was too much truth to bury. Too much evidence. Too many witnesses. Too many consequences. The company's future hung in the balance. Several people would face criminal charges. Others would lose everything. The downfall had become unavoidable. And standing at the center of the storm was a family that had spent years believing someone else would always save them. This time, nobody could, not even me. The strangest thing about walking away was discovering how much space it created. For years, my life had been filled with emergencies. Someone needed help. Someone needed advice. Someone needed rescuing. Someone needed me to solve a problem they should have solved themselves. The constant noise left no room for anything else. No room for ambition. No room for curiosity. No room for peace. When the noise finally disappeared, I didn't know what to do with the silence. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Then it became something precious. The company investigation dominated local business news for weeks. Articles appeared almost daily. Executives resigned. Authorities expanded inquiries. Shareholders demanded answers. Financial institutions reconsidered partnerships. The damage spread outward like cracks across ice. Yet for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing at the center of the crisis. I was standing outside it, watching, learning, breathing. The difference felt unreal. One morning, I sat beside the river reviewing research notes when my phone buzzed. A message from Sue Lawn. Lunch? Simple. Direct. Very much her style. An hour later, we sat inside a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. She studied me over a cup of tea. You look different. I laughed. I hear that often lately. No. She shook her head. Not different from last month. I frowned. Then what? Different from the first day we met. I considered that. Perhaps she was right. Back then, I carried invisible weight. Years of it. Even after returning, I still carried habits from another life. Responsibility, guilt, fear, the need to fix everything. Some of that weight had finally begun disappearing. Sulan smiled. You look lighter. The word struck unexpectedly. Lighter. Not happier. Not stronger. Lighter. As though I had finally put something down. Maybe I had. That afternoon brought another opportunity. One that would never have existed in my previous life. Professor Zhao invited me to present research findings before a panel of investors and industry leaders. A small event. Not famous. Not glamorous. Important nonetheless. The younger version of me would have been terrified. The older version smiled immediately. I'll do it. Professor Zhao looked pleased. I thought you might. He hesitated, then added, You know, years from now, people won't remember who worked the hardest. I raised an eyebrow. They won't. No. He smiled. They'll remember who built something worth remembering. The words stayed with me long after he left, because during my first life, I had worked endlessly and built very little that belonged to me. This time would be different. The presentation changed everything. Not instantly. Life rarely works that way. But it changed direction. And direction matters more than speed. The conference room held nearly 50 people. Investors, researchers, entrepreneurs, analysts, people searching for opportunities hidden beneath obvious trends. I stood before them and spoke. Not from memory. Not from rehearsed notes. From understanding. For 40 minutes, I explained where logistics, technology, and infrastructure would intersect during the coming decade. Questions followed. Then more questions. Then conversations. When the event ended, business cards filled my pocket. Contacts. Relationships. Possibilities. My own possibilities. Not borrowed. Not transferred. not handed to someone else. Mine. For the first time, the future felt personal. That evening, grandfather called. His voice sounded unusually calm. Come have dinner. I accepted, not because I felt obligated, because I wanted to. There was a difference, an important one. When I arrived, the old man sat alone in the garden. A pot of tea rested between us. The sky glowed orange as evening settled over the city. For a while we simply drank tea. No business, no family drama, no expectations, just silence. Eventually grandfather spoke. You know why I asked you here? I shook my head. No. He smiled faintly. Because nobody else would let me enjoy a quiet evening. I laughed. The old man seemed pleased. Then his expression grew thoughtful. You've changed. Another person saying those words. I waited. Grandfather looked toward the setting sun. In a good way. The statement surprised me. Most family conversations lately carried tension. This one didn't. The old man continued. When you were younger, you tried carrying everyone. I stared into my tea. Not everyone, just the people I loved. Though perhaps there was no difference. Grandfather sighed. That's a dangerous habit. I glanced up. He met my eyes. People who carry everything eventually break. The words settled heavily between us. Because they were true. In one life I already had. The old man poured more tea. Then said something unexpected. I'm proud of you. My hand froze. The sentence was simple. Ordinary. Many people hear words like that throughout their lives. I almost never had. Not from family. Not genuinely. For a moment, emotion caught me off guard. I hit it quickly. Grandfather noticed anyway. Of course he did. He pretended not to. And I appreciated that. Some kindnesses are quiet. The months that followed felt unfamiliar. Not because they were dramatic. Because they weren't. For the first time, life wasn't a constant crisis. I attended classes. Completed research. Met investors. Built projects. Learned. Grew. Lived. The simplicity felt extraordinary. Meanwhile, consequences continued unfolding elsewhere. The investigation into the company expanded. Several former executives faced charges. Civil lawsuits multiplied. Financial losses mounted. The business survived, but barely. Only because emergency reforms were implemented quickly. Only because grandfather refused to hide the truth. Only because reality finally became impossible to ignore. The family changed as well. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. Mother stopped calling every day. At first the silence felt strange. Then healthy. When she called now, she asked about me. Not the company. Not my help. Me. The first few conversations felt awkward. Almost unfamiliar. Neither of us knew how to interact without obligation standing between us. Yet we tried. That mattered. The greatest change happened in Liangwei. Not immediately. Growth rarely happens immediately, especially after years of protection. At first he resisted, blamed others, made excuses, complained. Then reality kept refusing to cooperate. Reality often wins arguments. Eventually he began working, actually working, learning, listening, failing, trying again. One evening he appeared outside my apartment unexpectedly. I opened the door. He looked uncomfortable. A rare sight. What happened? Nothing. That answer alone told me something significant was happening. He stood there awkwardly, hands in pockets, avoiding eye contact. Finally he sighed. This is harder than I thought. The admission surprised me. Not because it was profound, because it was honest. I stepped aside. Come in. He entered. We sat in silence for several minutes. Then he spoke again. I used to think everything was easy. I nodded. I know. His laugh carried embarrassment. Yeah. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he asked, were things always this difficult? I thought about my first life. The years of invisible labor. The crises nobody saw. The burdens nobody acknowledged. Then I smiled. Yes. Liangwei stared at the floor. Understanding slowly appeared. Not complete understanding. Enough. Sometimes enough is a beginning. A year passed. Not through summary. Through living. Through choices. Through growth. I completed major research work. Secured investment commitments. Launched projects. Built partnerships. The future I once abandoned was finally taking shape. and it felt better than revenge ever could. Because revenge keeps you connected to the past. Purpose pulls you forward. One evening, after a successful presentation, I stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. Lights stretched across the skyline. Thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of futures. Wind moved gently across the buildings. My phone buzzed. A message from Sulan. Congratulations. You earned it. Simple, direct, yet somehow meaningful. I smiled, then put the phone away. Years ago, I thought success would feel like proving everyone wrong. Standing above them. Winning. I had been mistaken. Success felt quieter. More personal. Less dramatic. It felt like waking up without resentment. Like looking forward instead of backward. Like building something because you wanted to, not because you needed validation. Peace begins when winning stops mattering. I looked across the city one more time. The future stretched ahead. Not perfect. Not guaranteed. Mine. And for the first time in either life, that was enough. But one final chapter remained. One final conversation. One final piece of the past still waited. Soon I would face it. And when I did, I would finally understand whether some wounds truly healed or merely stopped bleeding. The invitation arrived on a rainy afternoon. No explanation. No dramatic message. Just a location and a time. Liang family residence. Sunday. Dinner. I stared at the screen for several moments, then smiled faintly. For most of my life, a message like that would have filled me with anxiety. Questions. Expectations. Responsibilities. This time it felt different. Not because the past had disappeared, because it no longer controlled me. I put the phone away and returned to work. For another hour, I reviewed proposals, answered messages, and finalized plans for a new logistics platform. The company I had helped create now occupied 3 floors of a modern office tower overlooking the river. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, people told me I lacked business instinct, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I wasn't capable of leading. Most of those judgments came from people who never actually watched me work. Or perhaps they did. Perhaps they simply preferred seeing someone else receive the credit. Either way, it no longer mattered. Outside my office window, cranes moved across the skyline. New buildings rose. New roads appeared. New futures took shape, including mine. Sunday arrived quietly. The old family residence looked smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps I had simply grown. The familiar gate opened. The familiar garden stretched ahead. The familiar stone pathway wound toward the main house. For a moment, memories surfaced. 2 lives worth. Childhood laughter. Family dinners. Arguments. Disappointments. Sacrifices. Regrets. A lifetime of wanting something I couldn't name. Then the feeling passed. I walked forward. The door opened before I knocked. Mother stood there. For a second, neither of us spoke. Time had left subtle marks on her face. Not many. Enough. Her eyes softened. You came. I said I would. A smile appeared. Small. Genuine. Not forced. Not strategic. Just a smile. Come inside. I followed her into the dining room. Everyone was already there. Grandfather. Father. Liang Wei. Several relatives. The atmosphere felt strangely calm. Not tense. Not celebratory. Reflective. Like people standing at the end of something. Or perhaps the beginning. Grandfather gestured toward an empty seat. I sat. Dinner began. At first, conversation remained ordinary. Food. Work. News. Life. Nobody mentioned the past. Nobody mentioned the company. Nobody mentioned the investigation. Then eventually Father put down his chopsticks. The room quieted. I knew immediately. This was why I had been invited. He looked older now. Not weak. Just honest. There's a difference. Some people spend years hiding behind authority. When a mask finally falls, age becomes visible. Father took a slow breath, then looked directly at me. I owe you an apology. Silence settled across the table. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. I remained still, not because I was shocked, because I wanted to hear the rest. Father continued. For many years, I thought responsibility and sacrifice were the same thing. His voice remained steady. But they aren't. No one spoke. The old version of me would have felt vindicated, triumphant, satisfied. Instead, I felt something quieter. Sadness, because understanding had arrived years too late. It had arrived, and that mattered. Father lowered his gaze briefly. When the company nearly collapsed, I kept asking why nobody fixed it. A faint, bitter smile appeared. Then I realized something. He looked back up. The person who used to fix everything wasn't there anymore. The room remained silent. I said nothing. He wasn't finished. I spent years assuming you'd always be there. The honesty surprised everyone, perhaps even him. Father shook his head. I never asked what it cost you. Emotion flickered across Mother's face. Liang Wei stared at the table. Grandfather quietly drank tea. Nobody interrupted, because some truths deserve space. Eventually, Father exhaled. I'm sorry. The words landed gently. No drama, no tears, no grand performance, just sincerity. And somehow that made them more powerful. I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the father who disappointed me, not as the man who overlooked me, just a flawed human being, trying, perhaps for the first time. The silence stretched. Then I nodded. I know. Relief crossed his face. Not because he was forgiven, because he had finally said it. Sometimes confession matters as much as forgiveness. Later that evening, Liang Wei found me alone in the garden. The sky glowed with city lights. The same garden where countless family conversations had occurred, most of them painful. This one felt different. Liang Wei leaned against the stone railing. For a while he said nothing. Then, you were right. I laughed softly. About what? He looked embarrassed. About everything. That's very broad. It should be. The answer surprised me enough to smile. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his expression grew serious. When you stopped helping, he paused, searching for words. I hated you. I appreciated the honesty. I know. I thought you'd abandoned us. Wind moved through the trees. The city hummed beyond the walls. Liang Wei looked toward the lights, then continued. But eventually I realized something. His voice lowered. You weren't abandoning us. I waited. He swallowed. You were finally stopping us from abandoning ourselves. The statement hit harder than I expected, because it was true. Not perfectly, not completely. True enough. Liang Wei laughed quietly. I still hate solving problems. I know. They're exhausting. I nodded. Yes. His expression became thoughtful. How did you do it for so long? The question lingered. How indeed? Love, hope, habit, fear, need. 1,000 reasons. None healthy. I looked toward the skyline, then answered honestly. I didn't know any other way. Liang Wei absorbed that, then slowly nodded. Neither of us spoke again for a while. We didn't need to. Some relationships heal through conversation. Others heal through understanding. Months passed. Life continued. Not dramatically. Naturally. The best kind of continuation. My company expanded steadily. Not explosively. Sustainably. The way real success often grows. One office became 2. 2 became 4. Projects evolved. Teams expanded. Partnerships strengthened. Investors remained confident. Most importantly, I enjoyed the work. Not every day. Not every moment. Enough. Enough to wake up excited. Enough to keep moving forward. Enough to feel alive. The family company survived as well. Smaller. Leaner. More honest. Several people lost positions. Several people faced legal consequences. Several careers ended. None because I pursued revenge. Consequences simply arrived, as they often do. The truth had exposed damage already present. Nothing more. Nothing less. One autumn evening, nearly 3 years after my return, I stood before a crowd of entrepreneurs and investors. The venue overlooked the river. The city lights reflected across the water. A large screen displayed my company's achievements. Partnerships, innovations, growth, the future, my future. The audience applauded. For a brief moment the scene felt strangely familiar. Another stage, another crowd, another life. Only this time something fundamental had changed. I wasn't standing in the shadows. I wasn't supporting someone else's dream. I wasn't waiting for recognition. I was simply living the life I had built. After the event ended, guests approached with congratulations, questions, business discussions, opportunities. Eventually the crowd thinned. The hall grew quieter. I stepped onto the balcony overlooking the river. Cold air greeted me. The city stretched endlessly before me. Beautiful, alive, moving forward. A voice spoke behind me. Thinking about the past. I turned. Grandfather stood there holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to me. I accepted. Sometimes. The old man nodded. Regret. I considered the question carefully, then shook my head. No. And surprisingly, it was true. The bitterness was gone. Not forgotten. Gone. Because the past no longer owned me. Grandfather smiled faintly. Good. We stood in silence, watching the river, watching the city, watching the future. Eventually, he spoke again. Do you know what your second chance was really for? The question made me smile, because years ago I would have answered differently. I would have talked about success, about proving people wrong, about avoiding mistakes. Now I understood better. I looked across the water, then answered. It wasn't about changing them. The old man waited. I took a slow breath, then finished. It was about changing me. Grandfather's smile widened. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. The answer was enough. Later that night, I returned home. The city lights reflected across the glass windows of my apartment. My apartment, my life, my future. I stood quietly for a long moment, thinking about the man who died in the rain. The man who believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. The man who spent years carrying burdens nobody asked him to carry. The man who disappeared so others could shine. I felt sadness for him, compassion too, but not regret, because without him, I would never have become this version of myself. The lesson had been expensive, painfully expensive, yet I finally understood it. You cannot build a future while living entirely for someone else's expectations. Eventually, you must choose their path or your own. The first time, I chose theirs. The second time, I chose mine. Outside, the city continued glowing beneath the night sky. Inside, peace settled quietly into the spaces where resentment once lived. And for the first time in either life, I felt completely free. The future they said I could never reach was never beyond my ability. It was beyond their imagination. And now at last it belonged to me.